some things, a little further out and whatnot. What we did for this one is filter everything for the last 18 months. We wanted to look at stuff that was being built kind of in the last build cycle, right? And not stuff that was older than that. Maybe it's out of fashion. Maybe we're not building that kind of thing anymore. Maybe technology is advanced, that kind of thing. So this is kind of, what's being built today. So some of these homes would be still in construction. Some of them would already be complete. And as far as the size of homes we're looking at today, the average is a 2,000 square foot home. That's our middle and kind of the most common size that we're seeing. A lot of smaller places as well. So in that 70 to 100 meter squared sort of building, and a few on the gigantic and larger side. The ones on the high side there in the 800-900 meter range, some of those would be small apartment buildings that are modeled as a whole unit rather than as individual units. And some of these smaller ones would be like a half duplex or things like that. So what we're looking at here is actually the size, the floor size within the model, not necessarily the total size of the building. But that's how we measure step code. So that becomes relevant. So it's actually the model size that we're looking at, not necessarily the total size of the building that we're looking at step code. So of these houses in this database, this is what has been reached for the steps. We've got kind of a decent chunk of houses down at step 1 and a few in step 2, biggest chunk in step 3, and then we taper off as we get up to step 4 and 5. Now, what's interesting is that most of the homes in step 2 or 1 and 2 are homes that started earlier. So these are the older ones in this data set, the ones that kind of got in under the wire before step code 3 became mandatory in a lot of the places that we work. And of course, the bulk here is step code 3 because most of the places we work, step code 3 is the minimum now. And we're seeing a real trend towards the higher steps. So if we just look at the last 6 months, this is what the database looks like. Almost nothing in step 1 and 2. Everything's now shifting up to the higher steps. And this is a clear trend we see. This is simply, I think regulation, but also it is people learning how to do it, right? That step 1 group that was our first time. We were trying it out. We didn't really know a lot of things. Now we've tried it out. Now we can move up the steps because we kind of have a lot of things figured out, right? And so what this graph tells me is a couple of things. That, well, first of all, builders are figuring it out, and builders can do it. Builders are reaching the targets. And if there are builders that haven't figured it out yet, well, those builders are getting left behind, and they're going to be in some trouble. It's really time for them to play catch up, and that might end up being expensive for those builders that are left behind. But for the vast majority of builders, this is coming across as not too bad, pretty easily able to accommodate this sort of stuff. Certainly, step 3 is proven to be relatively easy, and I would say that most of the homes that are ending up in step 4 are there by accident. That's a bit of an anecdote. I don't have data specifically on that, but it's homes that were relatively efficiently designed. Builder did a good job on them, and oops, we hit step 4 by mistake. We were only aiming for step 3, so that's how we got there. A lot of the ones in step 5 were actually trying to reach that target. So as far as air leakage, right, this is that first metric on the step code that we all see, and it's one of the things that the builders have the most control on in our day-to-day lives. The old average back in the day when we sort of first started looking at models was about 3.5 in BC. That's 3.5 ACH. And depending on where you were in the province, that was up or down. Some areas were better. Out in the far north, we tend to see really good results because it's cold, and if the cold wind blows through, your plant complains. So their air tightness started a lot better than it did for us here in the south. The new average now, though, is 2.4. So we're seeing a real trend, down in air tightness. I'm sure is directly related to how us testing and things like that, it now matters, so people are paying attention to it and doing a better job. And what we're seeing is that about 90% of the tests that we have done are hitting their intended target. So if your intended target is step 3, 90% of our builders are hitting that target or better. And if we see where those targets hit on this graph here, we've got a bit of a scatter plot. We'll see there is a bunch that are, well lower, and obviously some pretty big wing nuts, some 1/11 there. I'll show you a picture of what that looks like here in a second. But the vast majority are getting down below step 3, and actually there's a good chunk. The highest density area there is actually between step 4 and 5. So a lot of the builders are hitting in between step 4 and 5. That's that 1.0 to kind of 1.5 range. That seems to be where a good portion of builders are kind of settling out, and they're just doing that with best practice, kind of good techniques and things like that. And to do that, the technique that is most commonly in the lower part of that graph, in the kind of step 4 or 5 range, is an exterior sealed membrane. So we're moving away from sealed poly and to an exterior sealed membrane. So that's just taping your Tyvek. No fancy materials. You can get fancy materials if you want, but it's just well taped Tyvek, pre-stripped through the upper top plates, poly over the ceiling. Good job on your pot lights and things like that. That's what that is. This isn't necessarily reinventing stuff. It's not necessarily space age stuff. It's just a good job of an exterior air barrier. Of those that fail, this is the sort of thing that we see. So those ones in the top sort of part of the scatter plot, this is just simply a contractor just wasn't paying attention to what the trades were doing, said they were fully ready for the test. Obviously they're not. There's a massive hole in their ceiling. And you'll also notice that there's some real big messiness in this particular job. You see some acoustic caulk dripping there. It's generally pretty disheveled. This house, even when this hole was fixed, this house still did not pass, and it's simply because of that messy, kind of sloppy work. That's kind of a real theme that we see of those that are not doing well. It's messy, sloppy work. And for contractors and stuff, if you're paying for this to happen, you should be paying for I'm sure you're all expecting to be paying for good quality work. You're not paying for, the messy, sloppy stuff. So hopefully your quality control is already picking this sort of stuff up and demanding a bit more excellence there. But this is the sort of thing we're seeing. So it's not common. There's a few trades running around in areas that we work that will still do messy, sloppy work, but I think they'll probably not be in business very long. We don't have to worry about them for much longer. For the most part, trades are really stepping up, though. The one problem area we do see a lot, though, is spray foam. So spray foam has been sold as an air barrier. Kind of you just spray this stuff around and it'll kind of fix everything, right? It's the magic stuff. You're going to solve all your problems, and that is just proving not to be true. It is not a good air barrier solution. Doesn't matter whether it's the kind of new non-toxic stuff, which is still as toxic as the old stuff, but just a different color mostly. We see air leakage in this just absolutely rampant. We've started charting it. I don't have great data. I have one graph here that just started charting where we're seeing the spray foam jobs, and there's a direct correlation between having high amounts of spray foam and failing your air tightness test. So the less spray foam you have, the more likely you are to pass your air tightness test. And what we also see is that if you are testing basically the day after the spray foam comes in, you might get a reasonable result, other than in situations like I showed in this picture here where there's just gaps and it's just hasn't filled the void properly, which we see very commonly. But if you're testing, more than a week or even really just after a weather change from when you installed your spray foam, that wood is going to move, right? The wood is going to shrink, it's going to dry, it's going to get wet maybe, and it's going to shrink and move away from your spray foam. So as soon as that structure has a chance to move from the spray foam, you will no longer have an air barrier. And we're seeing very, very poor air tightness results from houses that are tested a few weeks after the install of spray foam. And it's really unfortunate because it's an expensive product, and so a lot of builders are thinking, oh, I'm gonna get this really great expensive product and it's gonna be so good, and it's just not. It's proving to be quite a waste, and there are cheaper options. There's nothing wrong with bat insulation. It's cheap, it's reliable, it has all these things going for it, and it doesn't produce these kind of negative results for us. So I highly recommend people steering away from that. There's a time and a place for it, but using it sparingly is really, I think, my message there. Looking at the Teddy targets, so this is the kind of the second big piece. We see very few houses pursuing the percent better metrics that are allowed. So it's either or, the Teddy or the percent better metrics. And we actually see very few houses pursuing the percent better metric, with the exception of those very big mansions. Those are the ones that tend to pursue that. They're heavily favored on that, and so they will go that route. For the most part, builders that are doing family housing, housing for bus drivers and nurses and teachers and things like that, are using the Teddy. They're a much more simple house, and it favors this really. The key factor there, and I think Norm alluded to it here for the next builder breakfast, is the form and character of this of houses. That is actually more important than insulation surface area, effectively. But once we pass the kind of design phase and we're looking at the details, there's a real interesting trend here, is that the most common wall system for step 3 is 2x6 at 24-inch on center. The most common wall system for step 4 is 2x6 at 16-inch on center with an R22 back. So they have the same wall systems in many cases. We're actually seeing the same wall system up to step 5. Usually then we go to like a 24-inch on center, which I certainly recommend. But we're not seeing a lot of crazy thick walls, or again, those space age materials just aren't coming out. It's just proving not to be necessary if we start with a reasonable, compact, kind of little bit boxy design. That really gets us a really long way in, kind of up the steps. And so this is good news, I think, for builders, because we can, in some ways, kind of continue what we've been doing, and we can go down to the local hardware store, lumber store, whatever, and we can request stuff. It's the stuff that's in stock. It's the stuff that's there already. And I do have to point out this picture. This picture actually comes from a house in Duncan, and the insulator there is a real pro. Does a really good job. This is what step 5 with poly and bat looks like. So you just notice, you might have to zoom in on the picture. I know there's a zoom in function there on this platform. I can't remember where it is. But you see how neat and tidy that bead of caulk is at the bottom and around the windows. Even the tape is actually symmetrical on the windows, which maybe isn't necessary, but looks really cool. And so that's what a step 5 job with poly and bat looks like. So you can do it. I think the exterior air barrier is a little easier, but you can definitely do it. And this is what a step 3, 4, and even sometimes 5 wall looks like, if we're starting with a reasonable design to start with. And certainly we're coaching our clients on that to start with a reasonable design. It makes the whole process a lot more affordable. So window system, same sort of idea as the walls here. So our most common window for step 3 is a U 1.5 window with a solar heat gain of 0.3. For those that don't know window values, that is a contractor grade window. Not a super ultra cheapo kind of crummy window. I don't know that you can get those super cheaper ultra crummy windows locally too much anymore. Sometimes we see them being special ordered out of Alberta and some things like that. But generally, the ones you're going to get off the shelf, like your Star Lines, your Ply Gems, your Mill Guards, all those kind of workhorse windows that we're seeing in a lot of the production housing, they are a U 1.5 window, and so these are pretty standard windows, really. Sliders, casements. Doesn't matter that much. That will affect your air tightness a little bit, but it's not a game changer, we're finding. The most common window at step 4, folks will start to see a pattern here, is a U 1.5 window. So we're not seeing a big jump in window quality from step 3 to step 4. It's actually about the same. What we're seeing at step 4 is maybe a more thought put into positioning of windows, or different things like that. Rather than spending more money on the window, we're spending a little more time in design, considering how we use those windows and where we put them. And so, and again, real key to affordability here is if I want to use my kind of standard windows, I have to be a little bit more careful about how I use them, but I can still use them. We do see triple panes and things like that from time to time, but those again tend to be those mansions, those kind of little crazier houses. Once we're into that kind of higher end, well, probably we've got the budget for a certain, different window there as well. And a lot of the window manufacturers are really stepping up here and just producing better windows for their kind of standard lines. And we're actually, a lot of the production grade builders are now starting to use a 1.4 window just because that's kind of the standard production line coming out of their suppliers. So we are moving there just kind of naturally. So on the MUI side of things, so this is a lot of times people think about this as like the total energy of the house, and or mechanical energy, you could describe it as well. It is very hard to fail the MUI, it seems. Now that could be seen as a bit of an indictment of STEPCO to how easy it is, but the truth is it is actually very hard to fail the MUI alone. Like, if you're passing the TEDI, chances are you're probably also passing the MUI. In our database, only 5 homes were listed as failing only the MUI at the start of design. And we've only had 1 home in our entire history of working on step code. And we were working on step code before it was called step code. So we've been working at this for a long time, and only 1 has ever been recorded as failing the MUI at the end. And I'm going to talk about how they did that here. And so it's actually reasonably hard to do. There is a secret to it. The secret is, first of all, you ignore your energy advisor and don't listen to them. You ignore the permit form that you received that says which mechanical systems we assume you are putting in. And then you go out of your way to find inefficient appliances to install in your house. That's hard to do because they're not easily available. And these are pictures from that house. Actually, the furnace that was chosen was just not the right size, and it was the brand is fine. It just happened to be an inefficient model for that brand, and it wasn't right for this house, so it wasn't working properly, and a whole bunch of other things. The picture on the side here of the hot water tank is, again, it's a new tank, and you can get them. There's maybe a time and a place for this type of tank, but it's a power vented conventional gas tank, which is one of the least efficient you can get. In the end, to rescue it, what they did is they replaced that tank with a boiler, and that did get them back into their MUI. They also added a heat pump to the furnace. That's what that unit on top here is. So the secret to failing the MUI is to build a relatively small home, which is a topic for another day as to why that's the case, and make a bad financial choice and run it on conventional kind of old school gas systems, and that's how you're going to fail the MUI. Like I said, that's pretty hard to do because I know very few builders in the Richmond area are using kind of old traditional furnaces and hot water tanks. I mean, space is expensive and these things take up more space, so there's a whole bunch of reasons why you wouldn't do this, and why we just very, very rarely see anybody failing the MUI. So that said, I want to talk a bit about things that are going to affect the MUI, and this is now somewhat unrelated to step code, because we know we can pass it, right? It's not a high standard. We know we can pass it with, for now anyways, we'll talk about greenhouse gas in a bit here. We know we can pass it with kind of conventional systems, but that is often not the best choice for your client, right? Step code is fuel neutral. It doesn't say you have to use this or you have to use that, but physics is not, right? This is the unfortunate thing sometimes about physics is we haven't figured out how to really break the laws of physics and somehow magic more energy out of a liter of gas, for example. And the reality is, and I think a lot of builders and even mechanical suppliers get this mixed up. We often will hear people referring to high efficiency gas as really efficient. And that's just not actually true. What we're confusing is cost to run and efficiency. Those are 2 separate things. And if we're talking about a conventional gas condensing furnace, we can put 1 kilowatt of energy in and we will get 0.95 kilowatts out. if we're looking at a baseboard, we put 1 kilowatt of energy in and we get 1 kilowatt of energy out. A heat pump, a super cheapo heat pump these days will put 1 kilowatt of energy in and put out 2 kilowatts of heat energy. A good heat pump's putting out 3. And so our heat pump is 2 to 3 times more efficient than our, condensing gas high efficiency furnace. So efficiency, there is just simply no comparison. The heat pump, even the electric baseboard, is more efficient than a gas furnace. Now, because gas does sell for a little bit cheaper than electricity, the gas furnace may be cheaper to run than the baseboard. So that's where I think a lot of folks get a little bit confused about that, is that the electric baseboard seems expensive relative to the gas furnace, and they, sort of mix that up with efficiency. But right now, gas is being sold at about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Electricity, about 13 if you average the 2 tiers. So what we need is a system that is 2 times more efficient to be cheaper than the gas. And a heat pump is easily 2 times more efficient than a gas system. So actually the heat pump is actually your cheapest cost to run in our area. So relatively easy math to do, and certainly we're seeing a lot of clients understand that and shifting away from conventional gas to a heat pump system, and that's putting them really kind of off the charts on the MUI side of things. It's an easy pass if you've got a heat pump, kind of pretty much no matter what you're doing. And so the second thing is, we've talked a bit about cost to run, but what about like the full operational cost, right? Sometimes, in some cases, heat pumps can be a little bit more expensive to install. And particularly we see this with hot water systems. Sometimes folks really like their small boiler, gives them a little bit more space to play with maybe, and it's kind of what people are used to, so they maybe ask for it. Well, as it turns out, if we look at the life cycle cost of these systems, the electric hot water systems and the gas systems, it's not just their running costs. The electric hot water systems are actually, in many cases, significantly cheaper to own and operate than the gas systems. And this hasn't been well understood. It hasn't always necessarily been the case either. Electric systems as well as heat pumps have gotten a lot cheaper. So sometimes, you might find a mechanical supplier or something that just hasn't come to terms with this yet and is maybe a little out of date. They'll catch up. But this is what we are seeing. So we are seeing the electric systems being significantly more efficient, cheaper to run, and their life cycle costs also significantly cheaper too. So this data comes out of a presentation that City Green put together, looking at the various costs, and we see just here highlighted in yellow. So for a good electric tank versus a tankless boiler system for gas, about $3,000 cheaper over a 25-year kind of life cycle. A conventional tank, again, about $3,000 cheaper than the gas system. And now I've put this on assuming renewable natural gas, and I've done that deliberately. The conventional natural gas is a little bit cheaper, although the numbers still work. The reason I put it on the renewable natural gas is because this aligns with Fortis's proposal. So Fortis has proposed to do all new homes 100% renewable, and so this would be the true cost if that proposal comes through. And this is what the reality would be. So we're seeing significant cost benefits to shift us towards electric. So then, why are we always come back to the question of, well, why would somebody choose gas, right? Like it's or non efficient systems really, and we get a lot of feedback from builders saying, well, the customer asked for it, the customer wanted it. Why are they asking for that was our question. And the number one for heating systems, it's usually because of what they're used to, right? As well, I got a gas system in my current house, works well for me, and I've never had a heat pump. This is new technology, not too sure about it, and we're just not used to that. So it'll take some time for people to shift there, but one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking to our clients about is radiant floors. And I know in Richmond that this is a very popular feature. We see it a lot. It's less common in other areas, but there are some pretty serious issues with radiant floors that I think need to be discussed. And I think builders, it's really important for us to understand these, because as we get more efficient in our homes, these systems really need to fade away because they really don't work that well. And my chief concern here, I'm kind of a cheapskate, so of course radiant floors are kind of a premium system, and they're really expensive. So if we can find an alternative solution, for me, that is a win, assuming we can provide the same level of comfort that a system like this might do. And we can actually; it's not even that hard. They don't provide cooling, which, as everybody lived through last summer knows, is a pretty serious issue in these regions. And so you're probably going to have some sort of airflow, air conditioning system anyways. Now you've got a redundant system. And they really don't work very well in higher performance homes. So when we have a radiant floor, we want it to be warm, right? That's why we get it. It's supposed to be cozy and warm. But if our house isn't calling for heat because the house is efficient and doesn't need that much heat, that floor isn't on and that floor is cold. And so, it's kind of a little bit maybe counterintuitive because, the floor, it just doesn't turn on very often, right? And sometimes in houses, what we see is that, well, the radiant floor will turn on in the bedroom, heat for a few minutes, then shut off because that bedroom is all of a sudden kind of warm, or maybe even too warm. And the heat doesn't even make it to the other side of the house. So you're never in a situation where you've got that cozy, warm floor. These floors work really great in a 1970s house that's really leaky and really inefficient. But in a modern house, the radiant floor just isn't really that desirable because it's not going to provide the comfort that people are imagining. You do see it sometimes in the odd passive house here and there, but typically in those systems, they have very few lines, very few heat lines, and the slab isn't actually getting warm because it's turning on for that just quick little bit to top up the temperature and then shutting off again. And that's what we're seeing in our step 4 or 5 homes. So if I have a prediction to make, my prediction is that we will see a fading away of the popularity of radiant flooring, just as people experience this, and the Pinterest interest kind of fades away. Everybody in their home sees this as a fancy feature, and that should start to fade away as people realize it's really not what it's cracked up to be. And if you're a builder with a client asking for this, I really encourage you to have a real serious talk about this, because it is an expensive system. It's usually a redundant system, and if you can save a bit, spend it on your windows, where it's going to have more of an effect. That said, having a heated tile floor in your bathroom is great, right? It's where you're standing wet and naked, and having warm feet in that area is great. And you can easily and inexpensively do that with an electric coil and just heat specific areas. It doesn't overheat the house, and it works great. So we can still have some of these sort of features, but they don't need to be run off of a kind of big central gas system. If you've got a client that is absolutely desperate for radiant heating, you can run it off of a heat pump, and that can be done.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
So we've got a comment here from Richard saying, "But owners like the radiant floor. How can we let them know about this?"
Yeah, so that's true. I mean, this is customer preference. It's almost cultural, right? Like it's almost cultural in our building environment, and we have to shift that culture. And I'm not saying that everybody goes to their clients and says, you can't have this now. This is a terrible idea. I just think we need to have that stern, open talk about this is probably not going to deliver what you're imagining. And it's a big budget item that we could shift to something that will deliver something that you're imagining. And yeah, they like it, but the reason they like it is probably because they're coming from an older house that has a high heater load where that floor is going to be on more often. Chances are they are not coming from a newly built, highly efficient home. And at step 3, you might still get away with a radiant floor working kind of okay. Step 4, 5, not so much, right? That's really where it's going to fade away as being something that is useful. And like I say, I think this is a cultural shift. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. And I think just as builders, we need to be kind of aware of the issue. Certainly, you see a lot of energy advisors aware of the issue, and having these conversations. And I think it's up to us a bit to sort of shift that mentality and to say, hey, I don't think this is going to deliver what you're thinking. We've been reasonably successful at that with our projects, and we are seeing, with the exception of those very high-end homes that don't really care about the cost, we are seeing, you know, anything with a budget kind of shifting away from the radiant flooring into a heat pump system that's providing them with that cooling and that really nice distribution of air, filtered air, all these different things that the radiant flooring just can't provide.
So what I'm hearing is that a radiant floor can feel really good because that house is drafty.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. The worse your house is for efficiency, the better your radiant flooring will feel. If you've got a good house, your radiant flooring is going to feel like a floor. That's it. Yeah. The other popular feature we see, of course, is fireplaces, and these are, you know, pretty universal in a lot of houses. And I got to pick on the gas fireplace here a bit because there's a few problems. There's a few problems with it. Number one, it's expensive again, and me as a cheapskate, you know, here's another $10,000 that I don't have to put in a house. Right? This is a luxury item. I don't need it to live in this house. I don't need it for the house to function. It's a luxury item. And if I'm trying to build a house for a bus driver, you know, that's on, you know, whatever salary bus drivers make these days, you know, there's another easy way to cut and spend money on the windows. They require maintenance. Nobody in my experience does maintenance on their fireplaces, but they do require maintenance, and that's an ongoing cost. And for us as energy advisors and you folks as builders, they cause a lot of air leakage. We see a huge amount of air leakage going through fireplaces. All those little holes that they drill in the sides for manufacturing and things like that, even if it has its own makeup air, we see a lot of air leakage going through fireplaces. So if you've got a fireplace, particularly one, you know, kind of big, ridiculous one like in this photo, we're going to see a big reduction in your results there. If you don't have that, well, you know, you can be, you still need to be a bit careful, but maybe you don't need to be kind of perfect, right? This house here had a huge amount of air leakage going through that fireplace, so they had to compensate by being really perfect on everything else. And doesn't mean you can slack off, but if you don't have a fireplace, but it sure makes it a lot easier. And you know, in a lot of cases, you know, folks think about them as like a backup source of heat, and that can be true. You can get fireplaces with batteries and things like that that will light when the power is out. But in most cases, for the fireplaces that we see around, they have a fan and they have an electric start. And if the power is out, so is your fireplace. So it's not a true backup heat source. And that same goes for the furnace. Actually, furnaces are often called backup heat sources. Well, if the power's out, your fan's out, which means you don't have a furnace, so it's not a real backup. And you know, I'm going to go back to my friend the electric fireplace here again. So this could, you know, in this picture here, could have easily been an electric fireplace, half the cost, no venting requirements, no air leakage requirements. They make those cool steam ones now that really kind of put on a real neat light show. You can have light show without the heat that overheats the room fast. And all sorts of things like that. No maintenance, so still able to have a fireplace feature without all the drawbacks of the kind of more conventional system. And if I haven't talked you out of gas yet, let me show you this picture. So this actually happened over the weekend. This is a recent addition to my slide deck. That is a picture of a destroyed house. The most likely culprit here being a gas leak. That's the operating assumption of the investigators there, is that it was a gas leak. Luckily, a vacant house and nobody died. Several people were injured by flying glass and things like that. This explosion happened sometime on Sunday, and people felt it 3 kilometers away. It rattled houses 3 kilometers away and scared them. Like, it was big enough to scare people 3 kilometers away, like the Russians were invading or something like that. Like, it was a huge explosion, flattened this house. Ironically, a graveyard in the front of this news photo. Of course, now the graveyard is just covered in debris. So I have never seen a heat pump do that to a house. But I have seen this happen regularly. You know, we hear about this at least once a year to houses that have, gas systems in them. And this time we got lucky, but and nobody died. But, this is an ongoing problem. And pretty hard to claim that it's a safe and clean fuel when it can do this to a house. The other point I might make here actually too is that there is no automatic shutoff, which I think is a real problem for the conventional gas system, because the gas folks had to come and actually clamp off the line to shut off the gas. In this case, it wasn't simply pull a fuse and the whole thing's off, right? So there's some real issues with this, and I think we're probably living on borrowed time with this sort of stuff. So now, hopefully, I've scared everybody and talked everybody out of using a conventional gas system here. But this leads me to kind of my second half here, and hopefully everybody's sitting there thinking, "Oh, we're never doing that again." But this is important. So if there's one or two folks there saying, "Well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, I'm going to use it anyways," we may change that with the upcoming codes. So the step code is changing. The provincial step code itself will change in sometime in the next year. I know Richmond is working on changing their regulations to move a little faster than that, but to kind of match the provincial regulations. So greenhouse gas limits are coming to step code. This was, for political reasons, a bit of an oversight in the first iteration of the step code, but that has now that barrier now has been removed, and we are now putting greenhouse gas limits into step code. So what does that mean for us as builders? Well, this is the kind of the hard truth of heating our houses or operating our houses. Another really good graphic from City Green that I borrowed here. A house on step 1 using electric uses a fraction of the greenhouse gases that a house on step 5 using a gas system uses, right? So it almost doesn't matter what step you're at. For greenhouse gases, it is all about fuel type. There's a slight difference in gas. If you're using a gas system, the difference is bigger. But if you're using all electric, what step is actually somewhat trivial relative to the fuel type that you're using. So we went back to the database and said, okay, well, what's going on, and how close are we to, say, achieving the provincial goals? In our database right now, 54% of the houses are what we would classify as all electric. That means the major systems are fully electric, so that's heat and hot water. And 46% have at least heat or hot water, or both on some sort of gas system. Now, I would note that some of these houses that we're classifying as all electric may have gas cooking or fireplaces or patio heaters, all these luxury loads. We don't have that data within the database. And so the plan is to essentially create a kind of moving window, similar to how step code was, is a kind of a moving window of performance. Now we've got a greenhouse gas kind of moving window to say, okay, we're going to start here, pretty generous, pretty easy, and then we're going to move down the steps. And with the first one being, you can use, unless you're horribly inefficient in your housing and your systems, you can use both heat and hot water on conventional gas systems. And so that's what this first window is here. And let me explain this graph just a little bit here. We've got, looking at the database, the green homes are all electric homes, and this is along the bottom here, we've got what we call absolute greenhouse gas emissions. So this is tons, right? So here's 1 ton down here, 3 tons over here per year. Blue is houses that have one or the other system on gas, so just hot water or just heat. Red is all gas, so they've got both. And so this would be the first window here outlined here. So there's going to be 2 different strategies. One is the absolute target, which is what we're looking at now, and then there's a intensity target, which we'll just look in a bit. And the idea is that we kind of step down this thing here. So first step, which you'll see here, so you see there are a lot of red homes in there. We can get away with using both, and only the most inefficient houses are kind of cut off there and have to go to a either a hybrid system or something like that. Then we're going to move to a medium, what we'll call them kind of medium or low carbon, depending on which thing you look at there. And the medium section still says, well, you can use one of your systems on gas, but not both. So that allows us to have hot water on gas or also allows us to have heating on gas, but just not both. And I guess I should explain too, above the red line, that's your cap, right? We're saying you cannot produce more greenhouse gases per year than this. Below the line, you're free, you're good to go. We're not too worried about you. In between the line, it'll be a bit of a size ratio sort of thing, and there's a bit more on that to come here. And then the final phase, which Nick or Norm, remind me of the date that Richmond is going to that.
Mark, we will be at the highest level of the step code and the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, or at least our recommendation is in 2027.
In 2027, okay.
Yeah. Pending approval by council.
Okay.
In some building types, we'll start to hit it before that.
And Mark, we're looking to implement greenhouse gas GHGI, the provincial GHGI markers, the intensity levels, and match them to step code levels beginning in 2023, and we'll have a bit more about that in the second half. So yeah,
wonderful.
What you're saying is spot on. So yeah,
it's going to go together and sort of tear us down. So those dates are coming. We still got a couple of years yet to sort of figure things out if we're not quite there yet. But then that gets us into this kind of lower area here. Now, this one's a really tight window, and you'll see that it covers off, it excludes most houses that have, kind of one or the other system. Most of those blue houses are excluded. All those greenhouses, those are all those electric houses, and they're, kind of getting off scot-free there. And so reasonably easy to hit this target if we're all electric. Not big barriers, particularly in the city of Richmond, where we've got pretty warm climate, and heat pumps work really well and are easily available in lots of installers. And so the second part of this, so there's two pieces, right? There's absolute metrics where we're just looking at total tonnage per year, and we have kind of this step down there. And then there is intensity. So now we're looking at the per square meter of emissions. So if we've got 1,000 square foot house, we've got 1 ton of total emissions. We're going to take that 1 ton and we're going to divide it over that 1,000 square meters. Very similar to how Teddy and Mui work. The problem with this is that small homes tend to get a little bit of a penalty here, and it's because they're just the nature of the calculations. We've still got a hot water load. We've still got people living there and things, and those loads tend not to change very much versus a gigantic house where, it's still maybe 2 people living there, and so you've got kind of the same hot water load. And that's why we see this little tail here where there's this arrow here pointing at those greenhouses that are kind of sticking out there. And that's a challenge for the small homes. So this could include like half duplexes, triplexes, things like that are having a higher intensity, but their absolute would still be very low, right? Their actual tonnage is very, very low. And that's why we need these two systems. That's why we have the absolute system and the intensity approach here. The intensity approach, we're probably going to see using that on the bigger, on the bigger houses, and the absolute probably on the smaller is how I would predict that. But right now, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be talking a bit more about the GHGI system and what Richmond is introducing in the second half. So we'll circle back on this.
Yeah, and it's worth a review too, because there's some important info here, and this really is going to fundamentally change how we mechanically heat and cool our buildings over the next little while. So I think it's important for builders to kind of understand and start preparing for now. So a lot of folks would have heard or had experience with the Vancouver Building Bylaw. And the Vancouver Building Bylaw did this a little while ago, and they had this 6-3-1 approach where they were, and it was an intensity where they're just terracing down, with the idea being, well, you can be on 2 systems, 1 system, and then no systems. Unfortunately, this does effectively penalize smaller houses, which is why the other method was brought in addition. But it can work quite well from an intensity perspective for the other homes that aren't so small. And of course, there's Richmond's numbers. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is this matches the provincial targets. Although I did see a note just the other day that there was a little bit of a tweak that the lower end might move just a little bit, but that to come. So looking at the dates there, you've got a little bit to go, but the folks will we'll talk a bit more about that coming up. So almost at the end of my my time here, and I wanted to put one last graph up and look at kind of the province as a whole, because I suspect we're going to hear some pushback. In fact, we're already starting to hear a bit of pushback from other areas, like in our climate zone 4 area, Richmond, southern Vancouver Island, the Canadian Riviera here. Using a heat pump is a no-brainer. It's already economic. It's already lower costs for the client. Even just using electric baseboards gets us past step 4 or 5 in a lot of cases, and that is easily manageable. It's kind of a no-brainer for the all-electric systems. As you go north, many of us don't work in the north, and I'm not too worried about it. If you don't, that's fine. But I think it's interesting and worth looking at, because this is where things get a little bit more mixed up, and this is where you'll start to hear the pushback. So if you're hearing folks kind of grumble about how the heat pumps don't work or things like that, you're probably hearing somebody either that doesn't understand it or works in the far north, because heat pumps do lose some efficiency as we go north. And so to look at that, what we've done is we've added a bunch of data from the far north here into our data set. And what we're finding, what's really interesting is that, so these ones at the top of the graph, these are heating degree days on the side here. So the coldest areas of the province are up here at the top. These ones here, these green dots up here are actually Vanderhoof. And these red dots over here are a ski hill in Kimberley. And so, these are pretty cold places and lots of snow. Heat pumps don't have a great track record in these regions. The ski lodges, they're not affordable housing. This is not bus driver housing. This is, pretty luxury housing. And they're using a lot of gas there, big fireplaces, things like that. The houses in Vanderhoof, which is interesting, they do actually have access to gas, but the builders there are finding it economic to use all electric and heat pumps. They're using, they definitely are using their electric in the winter, because the heat pumps, at -40 are quite a bit less effective, but they're finding it quite easy to use an all electric house. And what's really interesting is that all electric in the far north still passes the targets that we're setting for the south. And so, it doesn't seem to matter where you are in the province, as long as you're all electric, you can pass the targets, even if it was the same target throughout. Now, it's not going to be the same target throughout. The north is going to get a relaxation to, allow a certain percentage of their heating to be on conventional gas, which, is fair. It's, there's not enough trades around, not as many trades around. The heat pumps aren't as well developed for the cold and things like that. So there's fair argument to say that that's necessary. I just think it's interesting that you can actually do it even in the far north, despite those other barriers, and people are doing it. And so it's quite possible. So if they can do it there, if they can do it in Vanderhoof, you can sure do it in Richmond. That's for sure.
Hey, Mark, I just had a question on, just based on the data, do you have maybe an expectation that as we start to see cold climate heat pumps, that could change the equation in sort of the, central interior and the far north in terms of familiarity with?
Absolutely. And so we're already seeing that. So right now there's kind of like a fuzzy line cutting through the province as to where, south of that line, you're better off to use the heat pump. It's a no-brainer. It's an easy math to do. North of that line, it's probably a hybrid system, but it's this fuzzy line. We don't really know kind of exactly where it is. Right now, when we do the math, so we've got a bunch of projects in Kamloops. We have an office in Kamloops, and we do a bunch of projects there. A number of projects in Revelstoke and kind of into the Kelowna interior region. Anything south of Kamloops, the math so far has worked out better for heat pump. So that fuzzy line is actually somewhere north of Kamloops. And now that assumes a reasonable, decent heat pump. That's like a Mitsubishi, a Fujitsu, maybe a Daikin or something like that. One of these proper heat pumps. The one that we've got on order for my own house here is a Fujitsu model, and it's good down to -21, right? So now we don't get -21 here, but there are also very few places in the interior that are -21 for very long. You know, Fort St. John for sure. You got a couple of weeks of -21, no problem there. But Kelowna, you know, not very common, right? It's maybe a few days a year. And so these are easily available. These are inexpensive systems now. And especially in the new houses, we are seeing, you know, the ductless mini splits be, you know, really popular, especially in the townhouses, right? Where we want the cooling anyways. And for the townhouses, it's, you know, it's a ductless head in the living room and then maybe one on the top floor. And then one or two baseboards scattered around just to catch the rooms that we're not getting into, right? And so that's a really cheap system. We're seeing those go in for under $4,000. And be, you know, really highly effective, very comfortable, very low energy bills. Cost to contractor is minimal, and so really high degree of success there for sure. So it's 9:01, and I think that's the end of my allotted time. So I'm going to pass it back to Norm and Nick now, unless we want to take a quick look at questions. I didn't see any pop up, but.
That sounds good. Shannon, I know you've been monitoring the chat. Was there anything that we may have missed?
Yeah, there is a chat. Oh, we lost Norm.
But I'm still here.
Awesome. Somebody asked if you can add separate zones for each room for radiant heating.
Yeah, you absolutely can. It doesn't necessarily help the situation though. So again, that's now a much more expensive system. Now with the zoning and all that sort of stuff, you got all these different pumps, you got all these different valves. So we've just increased the cost of the system pretty substantially. We have seen a few folks that understand that the system is maybe going to be too big for the house and therefore not produce a warm house, and say, okay, well, we're not going to heat the hallway, we're just going to heat the bedroom and the kitchen maybe. But then you've got this really expensive system for this tiny fraction of the house. And I just have to ask, like, what is the point, right? We could do that with a little bit of electric resistance and only heat it at 9 a.m. when you're there in the morning making toast. It doesn't need to stay heated all day. And it doesn't need to be this huge, redundant, expensive system that isn't really providing you with much.
And then there's a question, I think, for Nick and Norm likely, is will the city promote exterior insulation?
The city is very comfortable with external insulation. I think the one thing that you need to keep in mind is the side yard setbacks. And so the setback is measured to the exterior of the house, so you know, the exterior of the cladding, and so you can't design a house, you know, with your basic walls right up to the setback and then add some exterior insulation onto that. So when you're designing the house, if you've got exterior insulation in mind, then you need to bring your sidewalls in that couple of inches in order to make sure that you've got that minimum side yard. When you've
overall, you still have the same floor area, because you can, you know, on the inside of the yard and towards the front, you can actually expand that way to compensate. So you don't lose any floor area with additional outboard insulation or a thicker insulated wall assembly than code. We've structured their bylaw that way. So
yeah, that's yeah, exactly right. So that's right in the zoning bylaw, is that if you have a thick wall more than 5.5 inches, then there is no that's not taken off of the floor space.
Yeah.
And finally, there's just a comment. Open plan houses zoning is not efficient. With open plan housing, zoning is not efficient. I think that's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, that is, yeah, correct. Yeah. There's no point, you're just one big zone, right? So.
That's it for questions right now.
Great.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah. Mark, thanks very much for that presentation. Very,
No
very interesting, and obviously great segue into the workshop component of our session this morning. But really, really interesting data that's showing how industry is responding to step code transition, but also in terms of things like decarbonization, electrification, and some of the considerations that you mentioned are really helpful in builders' conversations with their clients when they're in the design stage and looking at that piece. So I really, really appreciate that.
No problem. It's fun to do. Happy to do it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Mark.
All right. I guess we just jump in, right, Nick?
Yep. Yes, indeed. Have you got the con here?
I could give it a try. Shannon, should I just give it a whirl from slideshow from beginning here and see what happens?
Definitely.
Now, I'm just wondering if you're seeing you're not seeing this. Are you seeing the full screen or?
We're
Yep.
seeing, the builder breakfast slide.
Okay, good. And the next one? All right.
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. Really interesting. Wonder why. Okay. We may have to run it a different way.
Okay. I can try to share.
You may stop me as a presenter and just run that presentation I sent over and see what happens. And then Nick and I will we'll just advance slides just verbally. That's all right.
Okay.
Not sure what's wrong with WebEx on my desktop, unfortunately.
We're seeing your screen, Shannon.
Looks good. There we go. If you could advance that slide. Thanks, Shannon.
Yep.
Nice and easy now. Anyways, in the workshop component, we're looking to cover 3 areas this morning. I'll kick it off just with where the city is heading in terms of our renewed community energy and emissions plan, which we just took to council in February, and it was fully endorsed. And I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of mission targets and strategic directions, which are particular for new construction. And then we'll get into the heart of what we started our conversation and did some Menti polling in our workshop in September, sort of bringing that forward now into 2022. We have a lot more clarity in terms of how we're going to implement the next increment of the BC Energy Step Code, and also integrate eventually next year the provincial greenhouse gas emission intensity framework. That's that parallel opt-in that local governments can utilize with the step code. On that, we'll talk about how we've integrated that with our 2-option and 3-option approach for step code relaxations for low carbon energy systems in 2022, and how we're carrying that forward into future iterations of our step code framework to 2027. And Nick will cover that off in some detail. Yeah, I guess next slide. And again, so briefly on the policy direction, as I mentioned, we brought in our new community energy emissions plan, which is an update from our original one, significant update from the one that got us started down this pathway in 2014. So the new plan, in a nutshell, has 8 strategic directions that kind of set the action framework, the roadmap of actions that are proposed, many of which we're already underway on, obviously step code implementation and other things. But in total, there's 77 actions within those 8 areas. And within those actions, there's 1 or more implementation steps that set kind of a detailed roadmap for going forward. In terms of the kind of lenses that we're putting on implementation, we're approaching, we're really trying to center equity in terms of climate equity, in terms of plan implementation. And out of that 77 actions, 37 have been identified as particularly good levers to advance fairness, equity, make the benefits of, responding to climate change in terms of better homes, significant retrofits of buildings, access to electric vehicles and charging at home. We want to make sure that that's broadly available and specifically target those that are typically don't get a chance to participate in things like are unaware of incentives and things like that. So that's strongly implicated in our plan. And the plan also goes beyond territorial emissions to look at emissions from consumption and materials, stuff that's embedded or embodied in construction materials in a sense too. So we want to look at that piece, and we're looking to bring that forward in terms of embedded carbon policy later this year. Next slide. And overall, the targets are council endorsed 50% below 2007 levels. This is our greenhouse gas emission targets, and achieve effective net zero carbon by 2050. And so these are steeper targets than we had in our official community plan. So we're in the process of amending the community plan to have these targets reflected. And in a nutshell, they just reflect the International Panel on Climate Change 1.5 degree global warming limit, which Council endorsed in 2019. And so basically this, won't dwell too long on this stuff, but basically where we're at is that bottom line. You can see 2007, which is our baseline year, 2017, which a significant inventory was produced to get a comparator. And then from that point on, you'll see three divergent sort of lines. One is like kind of a very little action other than maybe federal and maybe some provincial is taken. So not a lot of climate action. Shows you our baseline for Richmond that we're comparing. And then that middle line is actions already adopted beyond that at the federal, provincial, and of course at City of Richmond policies we have in place, like the step code and implementation targets there. And that gets us pretty significantly downward in terms of 2030 and 50, about halfway there. But this new plan actually accelerates those with additional actions that will get us to that 50% reduction mark by 2030. And then at 2050, we're looking at some combination of carbon offsets, if we don't in fact get through our policies directly to zero by that date. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, 8 directions in our plan, and the one that's important for us, today, what we're talking about is basically new construction. So, next slide. And that the buildings are kind of reflected strongly in the plan. This is kind of another way of looking at those reduction lines to our, that's our deeper emission reduction targets. Transportation is a big piece of emissions in Richmond, but buildings, new and existing buildings together comprise about 43% of our emissions currently. So it's a significant area. Next slide. And again. And so the strategic direction, carbon neutral buildings, there's 2 actions these are sort of grouped summary of actions. There's more actions within this direction, but 2 in particular are important to us with respect to the step code, with respect to low carbon energy systems that we'll talking about this morning. And that's broadly to accelerate the transition to the top building performance level. In other words, passive house, top level of the step code, and we're supporting that through a number of means. And we know our local building community is kind of on top of this as well. And advancing implementation of low carbon energy systems in new construction. So we've been, implementing that as a 2-option approach for the last few years, and continuing that. So those 2 in particular are relevant this morning. Next slide.
And actually, Norm, if I could, Shannon, just back for a second, because this will come up in a moment. The strategic direction is important here. I think. Yeah. Please note that the strategic direction is that all new buildings will be serviced by low carbon energy systems and built to the top performance level of the BC Energy Step Code starting in 2027. So when we modeled all of our strategies and actions, we were able to achieve the 50% reduction and the net zero by 2050 with the offsets. But we have to implement all of the measures, and we have to implement them fully. So this is a key part of meeting our targets.
Thanks, Nick. And in terms of that, so where does that kind of stack up to with respect to sort of provincial direction and expectations with Clean BC plan on the energy step code? And basically for part 9 new construction, we're now at the point where we want to have, at a minimum, be at step code level 3 for new projects at a minimum, and higher. So that's that piece is now sort of implicated in our proposed bylaw amendment for July 2022, is that the options will be available from step 3 to step 5, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Next slide. And just noteworthy is that this year the province is looking at moving the base code levels. That's the prescriptive part of the code for those that are still prescriptive home buildings that are tied to prescriptive means in the code, but also the step code as well. That the assumption will be that by the end of 2022, when the province brings in the regulation to minimally be 20% better, that step 3 for part 9 will be that, or equivalent will be the new normal going forward in 2023 and beyond. Just so you see where we're at. And jumping back to September, this, we put in front of our builder community some options in terms of where we were going to go on the step code, and we presented 3 options that would include kind of a relaxation component as well for low carbon energy. And so just in a nutshell, option A looked at step 4 and step 3 with the low carbon energy system. We were also at the time and continued to, we're looking to kind of discourage the use of the percent better TEDI metric in the step code, and prefer the climate adjusted thermal energy demand intensity target, or the absolute, in other words, the absolute targets instead. So that's why you'll see percent better and absolute TEDI kind of interspersed among this, just in terms of the options. So higher level, yeah, you can use percent better. If you want the relaxation, you've got to up the ante in terms of using the absolute TEDI metric and or installing a low carbon energy system. So same thing with option B and C, but option B has three options there, and C has 2, where we just stay at step 4. So a number of questions were asked, and this is kind of the Menti polling results that occurred. So in the first question, how good would each option be at reducing energy use? So kind of an energy focused question. Very close between option A and B, with option B, a 3 option approach, kind of edging out a bit. Next slide. Next slide, Shannon.
Yeah, it's showing.
Okay, sorry.
Previous.
Oh, previous?
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, sorry. And then the second question, how good would each option be for reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Option B, kind of a clear winner here in terms of that, but closely followed by A and C. And how achievable are the choices in each set of options? The first option was viewed as the easiest to achieve, followed by the 3 option approach, probably because there's 3 options available, and slightly less so with C. Next one. And the final question, should the city's 2022 requirements be consistent with sort of past statements and what was messaged out in presentations? And obviously a lot of strong agreement there. And certainly that's been the direction all along, is to be consistent with that. So, in a nutshell, where this ends up on the next slide is that option B seemed like to edge out in terms of the feedback we received, but also from the point of view that it offers the best of some of the elements in option A and maybe option C. It combines those and provides not just 2 options, but 3 in terms of meeting the target. Nick, I don't know if you want to add anything in there that I might have missed.
No, other than to say that in the same way that we have provided options to date in choosing to build to a higher level of energy efficiency or a lower level of greenhouse gas emissions, we are providing now 3 options up from 2. And so you do have the choice between step 5 to use all of the building envelope compliance options, no requirement for a low carbon energy system. You can build a step 4 if you use the TEDI or the heating degree adjusted TEDI for your building envelope compliance. And then at step 3, you're using the absolute building envelope compliance options and installing a low carbon energy system.
So this is the kind of direction that we received from you folks in terms of feedback, and kind of how we're setting the framework for our proposed July 2022 step code requirements with that 3-option approach available. And I'll speak a bit about this slide and then hand it over to Nick Foley. But basically, as Mark mentioned in the presentation, and you know, City of Vancouver and some others that have already referenced kind of performance metrics in terms of low carbon. The 631 format was the one that we see as and saw at the time, and this is back in September, as probably going forward what it would allow. And as Mark mentioned, 6 kilograms allows for hybrid systems. You choose one: electric space heating or natural gas hot water heating. And the same for your domestic hot water. You got only one can be gas in that sense. At 3 kilograms, you're edging out natural gas for space heating and space and hot water heating, and maybe it's more ancillary use like a natural gas range at 3 kilograms. And at 1, you're effectively in BC looking at an all-electric building. With no ancillary gas appliances. So this kind of set the framework for where we were in September when we did our polling and our expectations and how we would define the carbon side of the performance on these levels.
Yeah, so absolutely. Actually, if we just step back just for a second, Shannon, please. Yeah, thank you. So as Mark noted, the 631 came out of the City of Vancouver's guidelines. Those numbers were adopted by the province, and we have been concerned from the start to make sure that the policies that we were enacting were consistent with those of the province. And so back in September, when we talked to you, these were the numbers that were being used, and so these were the numbers that we ourselves proposed. Yeah, next, Shannon, please. So that has now been updated, as Mark also noted. So these are slides from the province that show that they are there's a minimum base allowance for Part 9 houses, and this is per building unit. And so what we've got here is a minimum amount, and the idea is that it is not penalizing small houses. Next, please. The provincial system is suggesting also a maximum cap, with the idea that as houses grow beyond a certain size, even a small house has to have a kitchen and a bathroom and a lot of those energy drivers. As your house gets bigger, you're not putting in 2, 3, 4 kitchens. And so what happens is your greenhouse gas emissions don't go up at the same rate per additional square meter of floor space. So it does make sense to have a maximum cap when you have houses above a certain size, and that's what the province is proposing here, is a maximum cap per building unit to be put in place. And so I'm emphasizing per building unit because for a townhouse building, we have multiple building, or even a single family house with a secondary suite, we have multiple housing units within one building. And these figures relate to the housing unit, not to the building. So the base allowance relates to the housing unit. The maximum GHG cap relates to the housing unit. And then, next please, Shannon. In the middle, we have the greenhouse gas intensity. And that's where we had that 631, which the province has now modified based on additional modeling and research to 6, 2.5, 1.5. Next, please. Now that's all rather confusing, so I put it into a graph so that you can see how this works. So the base allowance is your best bet when you have a housing unit of below 200 meters. Then where we have most housing unit sizes, you've got that per square meter greenhouse gas intensity metric of 6 kilograms, 2.5 kilograms, or 1.5 kilograms, as we look at the medium, low, and net zero ready greenhouse gas intensity levels. And then that's limited by the per unit cap on the right side. So for your housing units that are above 400 square meters, you're running into the cap. And that's the way the regime works. So and we're all different kinds of learners. This one makes intuitively more sense to me as a way of understanding what these limits for housing units are.
Nick, there might be a question in the chat. I can't check it because I'm presenting, but
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you want to wait till the end or it might be relevant to the slide.
Org.
I didn't see anything yet, Shan.
Okay,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm monitoring it, so
we can review at the end as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
no worries. We're not going to miss any questions.
So yeah, so there we go. That 6.2.5, 1.5 is a refinement of the earlier 6.3.1 that we had talked about in our Builder Breakfast to You in September. And so next slide, we have revised our intensity targets to remain in step with the province and frankly the latest the latest information that we have on this. So we are proposing that our own greenhouse gas intensity targets be precisely the same as the province is adopting, with base minimum, the maximum cap, and these intensity numbers for that mid-range of housing in line with what the province is proposing. Next, please, Shannon. And so here then are the step code and GHG requirements that staff are proposing to recommend to council for adoption as of July 1st, 2022. Here we go. So the green is what we've already had enacted July 2022, which is that third column in blue is what we are proposing be put in place. So we, as mentioned just a few minutes ago, we've got building to energy step code 5. We've got step 4 using the absolute building envelope metrics. And then we have the choice of building to step code or step 3 of the step code using absolute building envelope metrics and a greenhouse gas intensity of 2.5 kilograms per meter of conditioned floor space. Again, with the base allowance and the maximum cap as defined by the province. So that is what we are recommending at this point in time be forwarded to council as a recommendation for our new requirements that would enter into force as of July 1st, 2022. Now, here's a note for folks who are involved in DP application processes, as may be the case if you're dealing with a subdivided single-family lot or with a townhouse development. This would be in line with our in-stream permit applications, our in-stream provisions that have been enacted back in 2018 and in 2020. So assuming that similar provisions are enacted this time, which seems like a reasonable assumption, then here's what I think here's what we would be recommending be adopted as in-stream provisions. That if a development permit has been issued prior to July 1st, 2022, that you can build to the previous requirements that were in force when that DP was issued for the time period that development permit is valid, which is 2 years from the time of issuance. You've got 2 years to submit your building permit application to construct. Now, if an acceptable development permit application has been submitted prior to the adoption of Bylaw 10205, which is, or actually it's 10, at any rate, the bylaw that is enacting the new requirements. I think I've got my number wrong there, but it's the bylaw that would change the energy step code requirements. So we would expect that to happen in, I think, the May timeframe. And it is endorsed by a development permit panel prior to Oh my gosh, I've got the years wrong here. I apologize for this. So if it's endorsed by a DP panel prior to July 1st, 2023, not 2021, July 1st, 2023, and a complete building permit application acceptable to the city is submitted prior to July 1st, 2023, which is to say a year after these requirements enter into force, then again, you can build to the requirements that are currently in force for the Energy Step Code, which is the that second column in green, the December 2020 requirements.
And
So I
Nick, I
hope that
just wanted to interject. We'll make that little adjustment before we share the presentation after.
yes, we will.
Yes.
Yes, apologies for that. Um, but hopefully that's clear to everyone. I can reiterate if you like, if anyone needs further clarification. So those are the requirements that we are proposing be enter into force as of July 1st, 2022. But we are also proposing a timetable for the adoption of additional requirements out to 2027. And this is in line with no surprises. As Norm has noted, we are doing we put a lot of importance on no surprises, and even with the a constantly changing policy background, we are prioritizing keeping our commitments and keeping these requirements in line with previous statements and your expectations. We really do want you to have lots of notice so that you can prepare and build to success as these new requirements come down. So in the interest of giving you as much foresight as possible into what is coming down the line, we are showing you our current recommendations about how we would think future increments in requirements should go, keeping in mind that each of these requirements still needs to go to council for adoption. So these are simply recommendations that we will be providing to council. They will not be enacted by bylaw until closer to the date. The only requirements that will be enacted are the ones that would be put in place for July 1st, 2022. So here we go. Here's our recommendation for future requirements. In July 2023, we are proposing that we formally switch over to the provincial greenhouse gas intensity setup, which we've already, Mark has spoken to, and that we've spoken to as well. We're fully aligned with the provincial system, but we would still be adopting it as a local government because the provincial government has yet to formally adopt or implement their greenhouse gas intensity system. But we expect that by the end of the year, the government will have done so, and that will enable us to switch over to the provincial system as of July 1st, 2023. So and in doing so, the big change that happens is that because we're now citing provincial standards for both energy step code and greenhouse gas intensity, it is now possible for the city to require both high efficiency and low greenhouse gas emissions with all options. And that is why you see in July 2023, we are starting to require greenhouse gas intensity requirements even at step 5. You'll also notice that we are incrementing down the greenhouse gas intensity for new construction, for new building permits, new building permit applications submitted after July 1st, 2023. Next, please, Shannon. So in January 2025, these are the same energy step code requirements that we proposed as of November 2020. So we are mindful of our previous commitments or indications as to what to expect, and this is entirely consistent with that. We now have additional greenhouse gas intensity requirements, and so what you'll see is that we are incrementing up one step when it comes to the, or incrementing down one step, I guess, when it comes to greenhouse gas requirements. So at this point, to building to step 4, using the absolute building envelope metrics, it would be required to meet that 1.5 kilogram greenhouse gas intensity, which is the net zero ready level. Or you can build to step 5, where you would build to the low greenhouse gas intensity. So that would energy step code 5 is essentially electrified gas and or electrified space heating and hot water, but you could still have ancillary gas uses. Energy step code 4 with the 1.5 kilograms, that would be an all electric house, or an all. Next, and then finally, in January 2027, in keeping with the strategic direction that Norm showed you in the SEEP, where all buildings will be serviced by low carbon energy systems and built to the top level of the energy step code starting in 2027, that is indeed what would be required. And you'll note that our options have now collapsed in 2027 down to a single standard requirement that for all Part 9 homes, we're looking for step 5 and the net zero ready level of greenhouse gas intensity. And so at that point, we have made the full transition to high performance buildings in the city of Richmond. And you're hearing it here at the beginning of January 2022. So again, we're very, very interested to assist you and to help you make that transition to high performance buildings, and we're giving you as much notice as we can about what to prepare for.
Yeah, just very good, and just bring that back to kind of reflect the broader provincial goals. So when the province started to work in earnest on this greenhouse gas intensity framework for the BC Building Code, through Clean BC, an update to the Clean BC plan, the signal out was that they would have reached that very low GHG point in code by 2030. And the original target for energy efficiency, top level of energy efficiency, i.e. top level of step code by 2032. So that still stands. The greenhouse gas emission intensity is the new stuff. So that's the kind of the background base code framework. Richmond gets there ahead of time, as Nick has laid out, in a staged fashion that's consistent broadly with our original OCP. We didn't have 2027 noted in there. It was roughly around 2025, and there was a couple of options there when that was originally brought into our official community plan back in 2018 with expectations of the step code implementation. We know a lot more about this now, and we have a better understanding of how this will play out, hence why we've moved that top performance in terms of emissions and energy to 2027. And that allows us a bit more time for transition and all that kind of thing. So as to Nick's point.
Yeah. Next, Shannon. Thanks. So I can take just a few minutes to talk about this because when we first adopted the Energy Step Code, from the beginning, we had understood that as buildings reached the top levels of the Energy Step Code, that it would begin to have an effect on the design and the look and character of buildings. And as we are now starting to reach top levels of the Energy Step Code, at least for some of the options, it was staff and management thought it was important to really make sure that we understood the design implications of those high levels of the Energy Step Code and to see how they interacted with our form and character guidelines in our OCP and our area plans. And so to properly understand that and to recommend changes, if any were needed, to the city's form and character guidelines, so that we could facilitate high performance buildings within the city of Richmond, while keeping the many benefits that the city achieves through its form and character guidelines. Next, Shannon. Thanks. Great. So we hired a consultant to do a thorough study of a thorough review of our form and character guidelines. We also commissioned them to develop building archetype sheets as a resource, both internally for staff, for our advisory design panel and our development permit panel, for council, and also for yourselves as builders, designers, and architects, to understand the range of options available as we are building high performance homes, and the ways in which we can build high performance buildings that are in keeping with the city's form and character guidelines. Next, please. Great. So this is an advanced draft. It's not quite ready for prime time, but this gives you a sense of what we're looking at. We've got information on key considerations when designing high performance buildings. Next, please. And then we've also got sort of case studies illustrating high performance components, as well as where conventional strategies don't deliver high performance results. We've done that for townhouses. Next, please. Next slide. Oh, this is the next slide? Yes, we're also doing that. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't notice the change. We're also doing that for duplexes as well. And so we're looking to have that finalized and available very soon. And now next. Thanks. So staff has taken a close look at the work done by the consultants and the review of our form and character guidelines. And what we have done, we've been working with our planning and development folks, and we've really taken a deep dive into this and looked at where the areas of identified friction between the form and character guidelines and our high performance requirements are, and looked at possible trends that result from achieving high performance buildings with the form and character guidelines. And what we have found is that there's actually very few out and out conflicts, but it does require builders, developers, and reviewers and folks on our side to understand the ways, understand the new options that we might be exploring in order to synergize high performance buildings within our form and character guidelines, to understand how the look and the design of buildings may change within our form and character guidelines, but we may well see, we expect to see an evolution in the form and character of buildings going forward. And so we have, yes, thank you. And here's some good examples of that. So when we're looking at balconies, for instance, a conventional balcony design, especially when you're looking at concrete construction, where you've got extruded slabs, but also in Part 9 building forms, there can be heat loss due to thermal bridging, because your envelope in conventional designs can really penetrate through that building, the insulation of the building envelope, and there's a lot of heat loss there. Luckily, you can also get thermal bridging through sort of complicated form articulation, where you have a lot of bump outs or things like bay windows and such like. And so we expect to see, in general, a move away from complex massing to simpler forms, which is not to say that there won't be any stepping or recesses or projections or bay windows, but they will be used more judiciously. Is what we are expecting to see as we move forward. Next, Shannon. We're going to see, we think we're going to see a move away from sort of multi-pane windows or smaller windows towards windows without, mullions, perhaps larger single pane windows, and again, probably more care and attention to the orientation of the wall that the windows are put into, as we look at heat gain and heat loss through, our southwest, east, north walls. Next. And here we go. I think I got ahead of myself. So the balcony issue, which I already touched on, is we've been used to building balconies in a few very specific ways. There are many options for building balconies, and a lot of these really reduce the thermal bridging that is caused by conventional balcony techniques. And so we're expecting to see a lot more use of these alternative balcony technologies. Now, obviously, this is a real flying visit through the findings that we have of form and character. And I think it would actually make a really good topic for a future virtual builders breakfast, where we can do sort of a deep dive into the kind of changes that we're expecting to see. But I think the takeaway message here is that based on the analysis that has been done by consultants and internally by staff, we believe that that the high performance requirements that we've talked about are compatible with our form and character guidelines, provided that we are keeping energy in mind as we begin and move through the design process. And the other part of the equation is that as staff and as city employees and as reviewers of permit applications as they come forward, we need to be mindful of the ways in which the buildings are going to evolve as we incorporate these high performance characteristics, and that is something that we're taking very seriously and moving on internally. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of the work that's being done. But there's more to say, and we'll come back to talk about this more, perhaps in a forthcoming builder breakfast.
Yeah, yeah. Just thanks, Nick. In terms of that, we thought we'd put a few slides in there on the form and character work that's underway, has been underway through the fall, with some of the results now coming forward and discussions internally and what the implications mean. And it just basically means you're building to the top level step code or maybe a passive house projects. What can we start to expect in as we see very high performing buildings being proposed and that kind of thing. So we'll unpack the Part 9 implications a bit more at a future builder breakfast with some guidance on how to mitigate, say, thermal bridging with balconies in wood frame construction. Is a lot more straightforward than, say, if you're working with, say, a concrete frame building. So we'll unpack that a bit more for folks on the next go round, but I wanted to signal that out. I'm just wondering if there's any questions with respect to what you've seen this morning.
There are some in the chat here.
Oh, good.
Excellent.
Someone asked, old house insulation update is more effective for exterior insulation, but will it affect the side yard setback? Does the city support that? I guess we touched on that earlier.
Yeah, and I saw another comment to the effect of that this is measuring to the outside of the building of the building white cladding is
Sheathing?
thank you, Walter cladding is unusual, and that the city of Vancouver is perhaps the only other example that this fellow mentioned. My understanding from conversations with building approvals is that is the way that we are proceeding at the present time. But I will take the message back to staff at building approvals that our position on this may be unusual. We are, the reason that we have side yard setbacks is of course for fire reasons, and so we're conscious of those safety requirements in doing so. But we'll take those comments back. But again, as it stands now, building approvals has been pretty clear that when it comes to external insulation, you need to be mindful that you're keeping that minimum side yard setback when you do so.
Another question, where is all this extra hydro coming from to fuel the electric vehicle and carbon neutral, non-natural gas fuel buildings?
Somebody's been listening to the propaganda.
Yeah.
I think that there's a bit of fuzziness here, because if you listen to gas companies, it's doomsday. We need another 50 Site C dams or something crazy high. If you listen to BC Hydro, they're totally fine and everything's going to be easy. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And what I can tell you as a person with 2 electric cars and on my house, which we charge at home because the public chargers are always too busy, it's about the same amount of energy as our fridge uses. So if we look at the monitoring on our fridge versus the car charger, it's about the same amount of energy. So if your house can accommodate a fridge, if you think the grid can accommodate a fridge, you're probably okay for an electric car. Plus, your house should be much more efficient, so offsets, right?
I mean, I would note as well, I mean, in my previous life, I used to work for in the renewable energy sector. And I can tell you that 10 years ago, there was 35,000 megawatts of wind development potential in this province, almost all of which would come in cheaper, much cheaper than Site C is going to come in at. In fact, most of which would have come in cheaper than Site C was supposed to come in at. So, and then that was before solar even appeared. And at this point, even in British Columbia, which is really not a great place for solar would be significantly cheaper than Site C. So I think the prospect of there's lots and lots of potential for new electricity generation in this province, and it will be cheaper than the power that we're building now.
And it's not a one-to-one either, right? If we say we have like such and such gigajoules of gas, we're not burning that much, right? If we're running heat pumps, we're running 2 times less than that, right?
That's right.
So it's not a straight one-to-one. So we can't look at the gigajoules of gas we're burning today versus the kilowatts of things that are coming out. Before we run out of time, I wanted to answer one question too that I was having a side conversation with. One of the builders was asking how to tell if, what is a good heat pump, right? How do we tell? And really good question. And I think this is something everybody should run by their energy advisor. And if their energy advisor isn't able to say, then maybe find a new energy advisor. But your mechanical folks should be giving you a submittal or a spec sheet or at least a brochure of your heat pump. And you can take that brochure and look at your energy step code permit form. On there, that it will say what efficiency rating was assumed for your heat pump. So it might say COP, SEER, HSPF, one of those, but it should match that for your heat pump. It will also say the size of your heat pump, or give you a rough range of your heat pump size. So both of those are actually on that form, and you can use that. If you're unsure where to find it, just ask your energy advisor.
I have another question.
Yes, right.
From a passive design perspective, will the guidelines include language with cool reflective roofs to minimize solar heat gain and solar shading / awnings? Question.
Do you want to tackle that one, Nick?
I think
I don't mind jumping in. Go ahead.
sure. I think the short answer is at the moment we're not contemplating the light roofs for the cool roofs aspect. I think that is something that energy advisors may well be advising their clients in the design process. We're certainly very open to it and welcoming of those concepts, but at the moment we're not considering requiring that.
And for larger buildings, multi-unit residential buildings, mixed use, and and those kind of built forms, oftentimes you may have two podium towers and then a raised sort of common area. Oftentimes, you know, just in terms of doing aerial surveys of those types of buildings, there's a lot that have kind of partially green roofs or at least green space. So they're basically amenity spaces for the residents, and so they tend to have a fairly high level of green on them, either small trees and other plants, or maybe even gardens. So you know, some of that is entering into the picture for the larger buildings, anyways.
And actually, further to that, local governments have a very limited ability to make to implement building standards. So you know what we're doing with the Energy Step Code and GHGI is within our mandates, but we can't. The province has taken away our ability to create building standards and implement them. So there's that as well. Are there any other questions with regard to?
Go ahead.
With regard to the proposed requirements for 2022 or going out to 2027?
There's a question here. The step code targets that were shared identified Part 3 buildings. So are there different targets for Part 9?
Yes, there are. The targets that I think we reviewed today were all relevant to Part 9 buildings, unless we've made a boo-boo on our slide somewhere. So all of the targets that we shared today were for Part 9 buildings and not Part 3 buildings.
There's a question as well about when the next builder breakfast is.
That's an excellent question.
That's a good question. We know that we'll probably do hold a tri-city builder breakfast. That's with City of Surrey and City of New West, likely at some point in the spring. So potentially a spring builder breakfast. You know, we're sort of talking about it now, and seeing how that could play out. So not sure, Nick, if it would be as early as April, but maybe a May, June kind of time frame potentially on that one. So stay tuned.
I would say too that you could email any questions following the webinar, and we will be sending a follow-up email.
Yeah.
In addition to having the recording of all of this on our website within about a week.
And a couple little tweaks to the presentation that we covered in the city presentation. We're good.
Well, error corrections, yeah. Well, look, it looks like we're almost at time. Mark, thank you so much for your presentation. That was really great. Learned a lot. Hopefully, this was an informative set of presentations for everyone online. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it, and we very much value your attending these sessions and our ability to communicate this information and our new recommendations to you through this medium.
And maybe just as a final sign off here, stay tuned for probably an email blast. We're looking at, we might have some budget room to offer the subsidy reduction on the BCIT High Performance School of Construction courses, introduction sorry, not the introduction to that, but basically looking at that we've offered 2 rounds. We've had 15 builders and trades already participate to date. So that's the zero emission buildings all in one course and the passive house tradesperson course. coming up, as well as the sort of one-day zero energy building enclosures course. So stay tuned. You may have a chance to obtain a 50% subsidy tuition on that through the City of Richmond. So much like we have done already.
And finally, I just put in the chat that this webinar does qualify for 1.5 CBD credits available on BC Housing. Is that correct?
I believe so.
That's the email we got from BC Housing. So yes, we think they're good for it.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Have a good morning.
Thanks all. Thanks
Later.
again, Mark.